Welcome back to Session 0, where I mostly discuss Dungeon World. Today I'd like to talk about 5 things you can use in Dungeon World from Heroes of Terrinoth, and Warhammer Quest the Adventure card game. First I want to say thank you to my wife for getting me this for Christmas. She also got me this RPG book, which I talked about last week. Heroes of Terrinoth is a card game by Fantasy Flight Games. It's not a deck construction game like many of FFG's games, and like Realms of Terrinoth, it has its own special dice and much smaller dice pool. It's a re-implementation of an even older FFG card game, Warhammer Quest the Adventure card game, by the same designers. Because I love Heroes of Terrinoth so much, I bought it too. These two games are different yet essentially the same, so I'll draw from both of them for this video. They're out of print but not super expensive. They can both be found for around $30 on Noble Knight Games. With that out of the way, I'll go down to the table and show you 5 things from Heroes of Terrinoth and Warhammer Quest the Adventure card game, which you can use in your Dungeon World games. The first thing I love about these games is the dice. I am going to admit I like this more for World of Dungeons than Dungeon World, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is a much abbreviated dice pool system than we saw in Realms of Terrinoth, and for this game I really like how they operate. The action you take will have you roll 1, 2, or 3 player dice, and then an enemy die for every enemy engaged with you who is not already exhausted. So you might roll 0, 1, 2, or 3 enemy dice as well. And then you count up those symbols and do the appropriate amount of damage or aid or exploration based on the totals. The thing I really want to incorporate into World of Dungeons, though, is using this as a replacement for the Die of Fate. In World of Dungeons, when you roll the Die of Fate, you get a number 1 to 6, and how much difference is there between 1 and 2, or 2 and 3? What I like about these dice is they have 3 blank symbols, 1 counter-attack symbol, and 1 threat symbol. And that is more telling to me about what these dice can do and what it means in World of Dungeons as far as fate. This is everything's okay. This is like, well, it's slightly bad, and this one is, uh-oh, we're in trouble. So that's number 1, the dice seen in these two games, and they are a little bit different, but they function exactly the same. The number 2 thing I really like in these games is the heroes. Now, this is a case where I prefer the ones in Heroes of Terrinoth over Warhammer Quest, just because they both present 4 different classes, but in Heroes of Terrinoth, you get 3 different options within those classes, and they all give a slightly different ability to that class. So a little bit more customization there, and all of these can really be turned into a move for Dungeon World. Furthermore, something I always love is art. You can use this art for your character, but also we have all of these names to choose from, and I love seeing new names. I can absolutely see myself naming an orc character One Fist. We have Landric the Wise, Eldermock, who has appeared in most of the Terrinoth games as far as I know. I could be wrong. I've seen that name pop up quite a bit. Tomble, Burrowell, really good names. Use those names in your games. Convert these abilities to Dungeon World. I think this is a great resource to do some stuff in Dungeon World. Number 3 thing from these games that I really like are the locations. Number 1, they all have great art. They all have interesting names. Alchemist Lair, Peasant Road, Orc Battlements. They all have different traits on them as well. Dungeon, Quarter, Wilderness, Ruin. Civilized, Cave, Lair, Ruins. that really gets you in the mood for what type of location these are. Now they do have some game mechanical things on them. This pair of numbers here is how many enemies engage you when this location becomes active, how many are going to be in the shadows. And this number to the bottom right is how much progress you make in the game, how much you have to make in the game to progress through that location. Now, they all also have an ability which can be either good or bad for the heroes. Some can be good, some can be bad, some offer a choice, and those are just dungeon moves, right? Or I should say dungeon world moves. They are things that a specific location brings to whatever is going on in the story at the moment. I really love this one on Alchemist Lair. At the end of the travel phase, the party leader either exhausts one activation card or becomes poisoned. And those are two different effects. How can you incorporate that into Dungeon World? Well, maybe in an Alchemist Lair, a character could get poisoned, or this exhausting an activation card makes them a little weaker. That means they're going to have to rest a little bit sooner to be able to ready their actions. So maybe that gives them a debility. They can choose to be poisoned or take a debility. And there are 26 locations in Heroes of Terrinoth, 25 in Warhammer Quest. That is a lot of locations that you can grab some fun information from. And I'm going to do something really fun here. I'm going to shuffle all these together. I'm going to deal 3 out. We're going to at least think about some type of quest which uses these 3 locations. Don't worry about sorting. These all have different card backs. They are sorted into different tiers of difficulty. I'll be able to pull these back out and put them in their stacks really easily. We have a Bazaar, a Ruin, Sleeping Warren. So, what kind of adventure might start at the Bazaar in town, lead to a ruined tower, and then lead to a Sleeping Warren? Just think about that, how easy it is to take a few locations, mash them together, and build something new from it. I also want to talk really quickly. Here's a case where I prefer the Warhammer Quest version just because all of these locations also have some fun flavor text. And that is also going to help build different scenarios. So maybe you choose, if you only get one of these games or you only have access to one of these games, maybe just because you get some extra flavor text, you go with Warhammer Quest. Maybe you don't care about that and just go with Heroes of Terrinoth. Either way, you can randomize some really fun things just with these locations alone. The number 4 thing from these games, which I really like and think you can use in Dungeon World, are the enemies. We have a bunch of enemies from both of these games. They have an attack value, a resilience value, which is just like armor in Dungeon World. They have some hit points. More importantly, they have this box here, which is their moves. It is their AI. This is how they behave. This Goblin Archer has aimed shot. If it is in the shadows, the hero with the fewest engaged enemies is going to take 2 wounds. He is going to shoot at the hero who has the fewest people around him that he can hopefully hit. Then it will retreat to the shadows, and then it'll take another shot and just deal 1 damage. This Skeletal Horde is a lot of fun. It deals 4 damage, which is a lot. It has 0 resilience and 4 hit points, but it has an ability. It gets -1 attack for each wound it has suffered. And that's really thematic. As you are mowing these guys down, they deal less damage because there are fewer of them. I really love that. Also, there are some really fun names to be pulled from these 2 games. Ankaro Maro is a cool name. Odious Grump is a fun name. There are a bunch of really neat names here. Rita Wallace, Splig, Valindra the Dragon, and it goes on. I do want to point out the Goblin Warrior. This actually already has a stat block very similar to Dungeon World. It deals 1 damage, that could be 1d6. 0 resilience is the same as 0 armor, and 2 hit points. In Dungeon World, the Goblin has 3 hit points. Its moves, or its AI, is Inflict, deal damage, Pray, engage the hero with the most wounds. And that would be a fun move to give any enemy, really, in Dungeon World. They don't just close with an enemy, they want to get into combat with the enemy that looks the most injured. And that's really fun. Finally, unlike the locations, almost all of the enemies in both of these games have some fun flavor text, and that of course is just going to help generate some ideas. One last thing I want to say about these enemies is how they use the enemy die. The named enemies in the game all have this symbol on their card, and I think had these games gotten expansions, this would have been expanded into other areas as well, not just the enemies. I think we would have seen these on locations and even on the quest cards as well. When this die is rolled, no matter how many of them are rolled, if you roll 2 of them, you still only apply this effect once, but this ability will fire off. And that again is just a move. So take these as ideas for your moves. Ankar Morrow, this enemy or an undead enemy recovers 2 wounds. On Rio Weinhardt, either suffer 1 wound or this enemy recovers 1 wound. He has a resilience of 2 and 16 hit points, so you probably don't want him healing. It's going to be really difficult to get this guy down. You're probably going to take that wound yourself. Valindra the Dragon, you either suffer 2 wounds or you and another hero suffer 1 wound. So just an interesting another idea to add some different moves into your game. And these are all the high level quote-unquote boss monsters for quests. So, you know, that's maybe not something you want to do with every enemy, but give your really kind of big bad enemies a really special move that they can use either on or off screen, and that is going to be a lot of fun. Finally, just like I did with the locations, let's give these all a big shuffle. Deal out 3 and see what we get. So a lot of cards. Look at that stack of cards. Now, one thing about these, except for those named characters, they are in basically encounter sets. Every non-named monster has 3 versions, 2 minions and a master. And I wish they had done something a little bit different with the masters. The masters just have bigger numbers than the minions, and there are some game abilities that won't let you attack masters or elites. But for the most part, it's just that increase in numbers. It's a big stack, so I'm going to take 1 from here, 1 from here, and 1 from here. So those are the monsters we're going to face in those 3 locations I talked about in number 3. We've got a Reanimate Warrior. That's really cool. I actually talked about Reanimate Warriors in my Realms of Terrinoth video. We've got a Master, or Elite as it is in this version, Gigantic Spider. And we have a Sorcerer. That could be in that tower we saw. So that is just a really fun way to use some of the cards in these 2 games and randomize aspects for Dungeon World while also getting some fun moves for monsters that maybe you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. That's number 4, the enemies in these 2 games. The number 5 thing I like from these games is the quests themselves. In Warhammer Quest, it's broken down into a 5 scenario campaign plus 1 kind of standalone. And then in Heroes of Terrinoth, you have 8 standalone missions. All of them do have some story text and then some setup instructions. And these reward, defeat, victory, defeat, they are kind of the impending doom for failing this particular danger. On the front sides of these cards, they all have a little special feature that is going to be active in that scenario. They also have this peril track, and this peril track is going to act a lot like Grim Portents. Every turn this goes up, and when it lands on one of these colored spaces, whatever event is in that color is going to fire off. So that is a lot like a Grim Portent. I really like how these are laid out because it is very similar to Dungeon World. So you can take all of this information, turn this into a move, turn this into a move, turn these areas into Grim Portents, and you could really easily make a scenario or adventure for Dungeon World. So those were the 5 things from these 2 games that I really like in Dungeon World. Let me know what your favorite was, and let me know what you would do with those locations and enemies I randomized a little bit earlier. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.